Hello, boils and ghouls. Today we are back with another series of short stories I have written over the past few days. It is essentially stories 8 through 14 for our Inktober challenge. If you want to see the correlating pictures that I have drawn, you can find those on my Instagram or Twitter, so go check them out there if you would like. Let's just begin. Story 1. Fluffy. Fluffy doesn't remember how she ended up in that cold, strange room. All she remembers is going to sleep in her warm bed in the home she was raised in, and then woke up on a hard floor. She looked around in confusion, hoping to see the face of her owner smiling down at her, ready to take her home. No such comfort came her way on this peculiar day, as a strange human in white walked into the room. The small bunny's ears were pinned back in fear as the human quickly jabbed her thigh with a sharp needle. Before she could even respond, she could feel her leg begin to warm up with whatever substance was just injected into her. The human just stared at her as she writhed in discomfort, taking notes at what was being observed. Her little almond-shaped eyes stared at the figure with disdain as her body jerked uncontrollably, but eventually it stopped. Everything all stopped and changed to black for the little bunny. The human grumbled in dissatisfaction at another failed experiment and called in a technician to clean up the mess. The figure walked out of the room as another entered. The technician headed over to the cage and unlocked the door before grabbing the fluffy white body. The small bunny hung limply as it was taken out of the cage until its heart started pounding within its chest. Her eyes shot open and darted towards the surprised face of the technician, who was about to drop the little bunny, but she flipped onto her feet and launched towards the shocked face. She was merciless in tearing away at the soft flesh and barely noticed when the tall body fell to the ground and the blood began pooling within the human's throat. The snow-white fur quickly stained in crimson as her claws continued tearing away. Eventually, the human stopped screaming, and her ears filled with a new sound of the alarm. She reached for one of the dislodged eyeballs and took a bite out of it before sprinting towards an open vent. The first human stared through the glass window and smiled at the first successful test subject. Story 2. Friendly Fingers. The tiny creature was making his way through the forest, completely immersed in the day's bliss. He occasionally stopped to smell the flowers or to watch the lively birds fly excitedly in the sky. He was young and everything was a new experience to him, but he reveled in the opportunity. He barely noticed the sly fingers move in his direction. It barely made any noise, but he was fascinated by the sight of a walking hand. It moved swiftly on its fingertips and displayed a strange freedom without an attached body. He couldn't see too much beyond the forearm, but it did not seem to be connected to a more normal body. The little guy was drawn to it though, and slowly approached. It never spoke, but he was still lured in, and before he realized it, he was within the hand's grasp. It grabbed him swiftly, and he screamed in horror as he was slowly drawn into the body that controlled the enticing trap. It looked like a glob of flesh with a huge maw and multiple eyes that stared at the little creature with hunger. Story 3. Prey. It was a normal day in Puckland. The Mr. and Mrs. woke up to begin their normal duties for the day. They had to go hunt the creatures that ran around the land, and those little things were such a nuisance. The couple knew how to handle them though, and would just scavenge for a super pill before gobbling down the small creatures, with the occasional fruit in between to refresh their palates. This day would turn out to be drastically different than all the others, for the prey had been preparing for this moment. They set up traps everywhere, and replaced every power pill for miles with morning stars that had been detached from their shafts. The Mr. and Mrs. never expected the dumb animals to create such an elaborate attack, and it was evident on the blood-soaked battlefield. The former prey had become the predators, and displayed the couple's corpses as symbols of their victory. Story 4. Below. The miners hit an underwater cave after a few weeks of working. They did not see any sort of spot on the radar, so they were quite surprised by the discovery. The team decided to explore the vast chamber, considering how unexplainable it was. They collected some samples and spent some time there before they had to head back to base due to low oxygen levels. Once back at the lab, they tested the rock samples and discovered it was some type of lead, which would explain why they were unable to see what it was with earlier area analysis. From what the excavators recall, the cave was lined with extremely high amounts of this element, so they reduced the frequency and duration of their trips in the cave. During one exploration, though, one of their men went missing. He had been in the cave with his colleagues one moment, and then they lost sight of him. He wasn't answering his radio anymore, and they couldn't find any traces of him, nor could they track his suit. They returned a few weeks after, though, to find his body, and this is where the entire team disappeared, all except one lucky survivor. He recalled the horrible event to his superiors. It was some sort of monster. It just attacked us. It moved so fast that we couldn't even react. A man in a black suit spoke to him coldly. I see. What did it look like? Did anything stand out? The man responded with a shaky voice. It looked like a tiny person, but it had huge fins and tentacles everywhere. Its eyes seemed to be enjoying killing us. It enjoyed it. Story 5. Don't jump into the Ballpit. We didn't see the signs. We didn't see them. A soft scratching sound began to fill the room as the terrified person tried to hide their shaky breath. The room was poorly lit, but a soft source of light gave the scared person enough to see. The scratching noise grew closer, and their heart began to pound within their chest. The young girl was sure that the horrible creature could hear it beat rapidly. She started to cry softly, which didn't help her situation, for she could no longer control her emotions. As the scratch sound grew closer and faster, she began to scream and run in the opposite direction. She hit a concrete wall and looked around for any way out. Her voice was breaking as she screamed, "Help me! Someone please help me!" The scratching increased as her ears began to pick up the sound of feet hitting the ground as the unknown thing ran towards her. "Please, I didn't know. I didn't see the signs. Help me." She paused as a distorted voice spoke over an intercom. "The signs were everywhere, and we told you not to go into the Ballpit." She screamed one last time as a large creature charged into her body and speared through her soft flesh with its sword-like appendages. Story 6. General Raton. General Raton was a worn battle bleeder. He had faced many battles in the past, and he was on the cusp of forging forward in another one, but he had to prepare for this new fight. The last battle had resulted in his only remaining arm being lost, so he had to adjust for that. He took some of the weapons that were closest to him and started by using his body weight to force a toothpick into one of his arm stumps. After it was sturdily in place, he had one of his soldiers shove in a sharp, hardened toenail in the other. He had the same soldier douse his bleeding arms in witch hazel before coating them in some crushed vitamin C tablets. General Raton was ready to attack the almond-eyed enemy feline menace. Story 7. Cumulonimbus. The little bodies of Hydro were surprised by the sudden attack of this growing monster. It would slowly suck them in, and they were absorbed into the thing's growing body. They lost all sense of who they were and no longer had their own sense of identity. They all slowly congealed into the monstrosity that kept consuming them, but they couldn't stop it. Was this their destiny? Or was it just a gloom-filled day? Well, there you are. The second week's worth of stories written by me for the 2023 Inktober challenge. I am taking a little bit of a spin on it since I am writing stories. I also have done some illustrations for the stories, and you can find those on my Instagram and Twitter. So thank you, creeps, for watching. Bye now.